Hi guys, for today's lesson we will be looking at the poem Vultures by Chinua Achebe. When we look at the outline of the poem, we see that it begins with a description of the vultures that makes them seem repulsive and gory. However, they are also portrayed as showing affection, which only makes their behavior more revolting. The second section of the poem describes the commandant of Belsen, which was a Nazi concentration camp where thousands of Jewish people were murdered and their bodies burned during World War II. As with the vultures, the commandant's love for his family makes his evil deeds in being responsible for thousands of deaths seem even worse. The title of this poem is a literal reference to the scavenging bird species described in the first section of the poem, but it is also a metaphorical reference to the people who commit evil deeds. The theme for this poem is the strange coexistence of gross evil and tender love, as well as a look at human behavior. This poem was written by one of Africa's greatest writers, Chinua Achebe, who was born in Nigeria in 1930. He has written novels, essays, as well as poetry, and most of his writing looks at the relationship between African mysticism and modern Western culture. He passed away in 2013. In the first section of this poem, we can see that the first stanza begins with a relentlessly long sentence filled with dark, sullen, miserable descriptions. He uses alliteration in the second and third line, drizzle of one despondent dawn, but this is an enjambment line, so it doesn't give the ebb and flow usually associated with alliteration. This helps to emphasize the bleak tone Achebe is trying to achieve. He uses the description of the vulture's seating position, perching high on broken bones of a dead tree. It is unclear whether he is describing the tree as being bone-like or if the vultures are actually perched upon a mound of bones. The birds themselves are described and painted in a grim image, having already described them as harbingers, a word closely associated with the bringing of death. He describes them as having bashed-in heads and gross feathers, and later in the final line, he describes them as having cold, telescopic eyes, giving the birds an almost mechanical feel, suggesting they should even really be classed as animals. He then continues to describe their actions. Again, this is very grim, as they peck at the eye of a corpse. He further describes the vultures eating the corpse's bowel. Achebe skillfully contrasts the light of love with the dark of death by mentioning that in the darkest of environments, the charnel house, a storage place for corpses, there is the presence of love. He also personifies love itself. He uses the exclamation point on the phrase, her face turned to the wall, because love cannot stand to look at the atrocities contained within. Here we also look at the cleverly constructed character of the commandant. His description is not particularly flattering. His only physical description describes his hairy nostrils, but his actions are kind and very human. He brings chocolate home for his children, a kind gesture and action you would not probably associate with a war criminal. Achebe makes us see that even this horrible man has a soft side, and that is represented by the description of his interactions with his child. It is almost as if his child represents his good side and the vultures represent his bad side. Achebe also produces the harrowing image of the smell produced by Belsen, the smell that lingers on the commandant himself, being described as human roast, considering the man smelling this way and then hugging his tender offspring. This is a very powerful image. Achebe brings the poem to a close by describing how even the ogre, that is the commandant, has a soft side, which is shown in the preceding stanza. He emphasizes the solace that should be taken in the small mercy, praises bounteous providence. His language here is particularly emphatic, and evokes fantastic contrasts, describing the commandant's humanity as a tiny glowworm, which is encapsulated in cruel, icy cavern. Even the word encapsulated isn't accidental, suggesting that his warmth is trapped. This gives a picture of an evil man that would rather be rid of the warmth if possible. This is further emphasized by the line, the very germ of that kindred love, that is not the voice of the narrator, but rather a peek into the psyche of the commandant and showing the narrator's omniscience. This is a very chilling thought, the idea that the commandant views his softer side as a curse. This leaves the poem on a very bleak note. When we look at the form and structure of the poem, we can see that the poem is written in 4 stanzas, in free verse with no rhyming pattern. It contains lots of enjambment lines, giving the poem a fast pace, but with a jarring rhythm that mirrors the dark tone of the poem. The first stanza is considerably larger than the other 3, taking up 23 lines that are all very short. The other 3 stanzas are 8, 11, and 11 lines respectively. Each section of the poem is marked by a line indentation rather than a new stanza. This could possibly indicate how one idea flows to the next as the poem develops. The arrangement of lines appears to almost be like a list and a building up of evidence. The short lines running on to the next could suggest a continuous flow of content that supports the poet's theme. For the tone in section 1, we can see it as disgust and revulsion. For section 2, there's a tone of puzzlement, as the speaker marvels that love could find a place in the heart of such an ugly creature with such disgusting habits. For section C, almost a horror, as the speaker contrasts the unimaginable evil that the commandant is guilty of with his feelings of tender kindness for his children who wait for their daddy to come home. In section 4, the tone becomes resigned and pessimistic, as the speaker offers a choice of being thankful or grateful for the capacity for love, or feeling despair because the capacity for evil seems to go together with it. Both are an integral part of human nature. Hi, thanks for joining us for today's lesson. I hope that you like and subscribe down below so that you can be ready for the next lesson as it is uploaded. Thanks, bye.